Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and today I'm going to be joined by my colleagues and friends Alexandra and Whitney to break down all of the astrology of February for you guys. We have a bunch of transits that we're going to be looking at. I think probably one of the big highlights we'll talk about will be Mars turning direct this month after its long retrograde in Cancer, but there's still a lot of action to come with Mars this month too. Some other interesting things happening that we'll take a look at today. So that is our agenda. Before we get into it, remember to like and subscribe. It really helps our channel to grow. We did some research over the summer and we found out that a lot of people watch the channel but are not yet subscribed. And if we get a little bit more of that particular demographic to subscribe, it tremendously helps us as a community growing our work and everything else. So thank you. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. You can find transcripts of any of these daily talks on the website as well, which is nightlightastrology.com. On the website, you are going to find a live events tab. And under that live events tab, you will see that there are a new series of webinars that are posted. My webinar for this upcoming month of February is on Venus retrogrades. We're going to be looking at the meaning of Venus retrogrades in preparation for Venus's retrograde in March. So that'll be a fun monthly webinar coming up here in February. I'll be promoting that more starting next week. So on that note, I'm very glad to have Alexandra and Whitney back. Hey guys.
Hey,
Hello.
How are
you? Yay, we're back. How was January for you guys? How's the new year been so far?
Womp womp womp.
Off to a hard. It was, that Sun conjunct Pluto moment around the inauguration was vivid. Wow.
So heavy. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't intense. That was a really intense. I mean, for me, there was stuff going on personally that was like pretty wild. And then to see that, and of course the Mars retrograde right at the same time I had Mars retrograde on my natal sun while the sun conjoined Pluto on my south node.
Yeah.
Wow. Smoking. It was intense.
It's been hard. Just saying.
On the bright side, I mean, it's been really beautiful stargazing. Can see you've been able to see a lot. And I feel like most of my clients and most of my friends have been having kind of one of those mixed bag Mars retrogrades, which I'll take. Like some good and some annoying and some inflammation, but some good stuff too.
I agree. Yeah, totally. It was one thing that happened as Mars has been retrograde. We shared about looking at blood work. We were talking about looking at your hormonal numbers and all that kind of stuff. I don't remember. It was a couple of moon cycle or a couple of months ago we were talking about it. And I did my next. I do them like every 3 or 4 months. And so on this one, after making some shifts in my diet, fixed some numbers in that. So I was like, it's so cool to see where holistic changes in your lifestyle, as simple as diet, can shift those numbers around into the places that you really want them to be. So that was a really positive Mars retrograde because it was a part of the training shift that I started talking about that happened at the outset. So that was pretty cool.
You shared a picture of some sauerkraut, and I literally went to the store and got sauerkraut. My mouth was so watery. I was like, I needed the sauerkraut.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I love the good things for the gut.
Yeah. We in our house, we have something called the Stinky Club. And it's the Stinky Food Club. And it's like, sardines or sauerkraut or kimchi or like all sorts of stuff that we have introduced our girls to, and surprisingly they like, because we framed it as, do you want to be in the Stinky Food Club with us? Because it was like sweet. Ashley and we got them to eat some oysters. We went out for dinner a couple of weeks ago and we got some oysters, and they actually ate one. And I was really surprised. They didn't particularly like it because I think the texture is a little weird for our girls. Yeah. But anyway, Stinky Food Club for sure.
That's so cute.
Yeah. Well, I want to let everybody know that our usual recording schedule is a little tighter. We had a few things that came up for us as a team that caused us to have to shift our recording schedule. And so we have a hard stop today. So on that note, rather than shoot the breeze a little bit more about the month of January, which we often do, and is really fun to do, and is really fun to also hear from you and all of your stories. We're going to do a little bit of an abbreviated recap of January today. We're going to dive right into some of our grabbed stories, which you all shared through the use of the hashtag grabbed, or sending us your stories grabbed at nightlightastrology.com. You can use that anytime. Tell us the name of the transit, tell us your story, keep it really concise, and we will feature it in one of these episodes. But we're going to share a few of them today, and then we'll dive right in. Alexandra's going to share the stories today that we aggregated.
Sure. Yeah. Starting with Venus-Saturn conjunction.
Well,
The
that was a big one.
Saturn-Venus conjunction happened in my third house, and I realized I've come to depend on TikTok as a source of community and expression since the pandemic. I'm naturally sort of a hermit, introvert, mystical type, so I don't get out all that much. And having TikTok go dark last night struck a really deep chord in my soul. I felt a sadness I couldn't totally explain other than realizing I was losing this very Venusian resource and source of community. I don't have an opinion on the reason it's been banned, but it's been a profound sacrifice for many Americans nonetheless. Obviously, TikTok has been reinstated since then, but I found that to be an interesting Venus-Saturn conjunction story.
That is it. It was what an amazing showing in the collective of a Venus-Saturn conjunction, where this medium, this social medium, which is thoroughly Venusian, anything involving relationships, friendships, social connections can be thought of as Venusian, hit Saturn, and all of a sudden it's no more. It was very temporary, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, and that Venus-Saturn conjunction plays out. I mean, it's going to happen twice more with that Venus retrograde. So I have a feeling that story isn't quite finished.
Well, I thought it was interesting too. I think Chris Brennan shared, and correct me if I'm wrong, that with the Venus cycle, it was basically 8 years to the day that like Vine shut down. And I don't know if y'all remember Vine from back in the day, but just crazy correlations.
And then 8 years prior, he had connected it to sort of the decline and demise of MySpace as well. So
that's fascinating. Yeah. And I know, was that the Nick Dagan Best episode that they just did?
I think Nick Dagan Best is always on there for the Venus retrogrades, but he put it out actually as an Instagram post with infographic.
Oh, okay.
That's where I saw it.
I know that they're about to do one, or they just did one. And it's been years, but Nick gave several talks on Venus and Mars retrogrades for the students at Nightlight. This was back right before the pandemic. I need to have him back at some point. He teaches really great classes on those retrograde cycles.
Yeah,
we'll
totally
look forward to it.
Yeah, I know that you've heard it here first. So I'll make sure I tell. Saffron organizes them now, but I'll tell her let's get Nick back.
Okay,
just get the word out to him. Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Alexandra.
Yeah, my next story is about the Sun-Pluto conjunction. This person is a Cancer rising, so Aquarius is in their 8th house, opposing their natal Saturn at 1 Leo. So that was kind of a big deal. In the morning of the Pluto-Sun conjunction, just as the sun was entering Aquarius, I was driving to work and I suddenly had a realization in great detail of how I could bring all of my various passions together into a program designed to anchor individuals in an ecology of care, fostering mutual thriving through embodied practices, connection, and personal and collective growth. Never before have I been able to see how my work and my experiences in psychology, trauma healing, somatics, community building, justice, and spirituality could be integrated into something accessible to larger numbers of people. I really don't experience this often, but it felt sort of like an epiphany or an illumination of something that was gestating. Perhaps Pluto's first clarity of what the path may involve for me during Pluto in Aquarius.
Nice.
Wow. Beautiful.
Yeah, super
deep. We spoke
deep.
about that on the YouTube channel when I did a talk on Sun Pluto. I talked about how a common characteristic of Sun Pluto conjunctions, or any Sun Pluto transit, including to your natal chart, is a feeling of the transformation of your sense of life purpose, and or a regeneration of it if it's felt kind of dead or something.
Yeah, especially if there's a client practice involved, having that come through the 8th house and to be thinking about how you relate to others and what you owe them and what they owe you and how it all ties in together.
Yeah. Good one.
So I have 2 Mars and Cancer stories. This one is so Mars and Cancer retrograde. I have the moon in Cancer in the 10th house, so Libra rising. And this might be the transit that ultimately encourages a change of career. But for now, it's simply testing my ability to transmute anger and empathy. I work as a live-in nanny with a kid whose sun is in Scorpio, and every day it feels like we are waging this sensitivity war. This morning, the only thing that could help him regulate was vigorously blowing up balloons. So he blew up this enormous balloon and struggled to leave the house without hiding it. He put it in this low cabinet so his brother would definitely find it. So I said I would later move it to somewhere safer. On our walk to the bus stop, I couldn't help but cry. I felt so defeated, and nannies and caregivers are supposed to have this image of togetherness, but I just couldn't do it anymore. I paused and I squatted and I said to him, my heart hurts today. I want so much to have a sweet morning with you, and this is really so hard. And with genuineness, he really replied to me and said, okay, I'll try. Once he went to school, I tried to do the helpful thing, and just as I moved the balloon to a higher shelf, it popped.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh, no good deed goes. God. Yeah.
No Mars and Cancer.
Oh, my goodness.
I feel like I've been popping lots of balloons in my 12th house.
Yeah.
Bad spirit is right.
Oh, my God.
All right. This last one's also a Libra rising with the Mars retrograde in the Cancer 10th house. And this person was also talking about the Mars-Venus trine that was happening because their natal Venus is in Pisces, trining their 10th house. And this transit happened close to their MCIC. So they say, I have recently had a very unexpected reversal in direction in my career and living situation that hit me hard and fast, but has been extremely welcome changes at all levels of me and my family's life. Most of all, I will finally get to become the teacher I've been wanting to become and hopefully become a good leader and example. The company I'm working for asked me to revise and redraft many of their procedures related to the department I am going to start managing very soon. When I first looked things over, I saw how much work and writing would need to be done, and I knew this was going to take months to make the needed adjustments. Well, I remembered I kept all of my own intellectual property from 7 to 8 years ago on a random hard drive in my desk. It's about 1 gigabyte total of original documents, experiments, protocols, quality programs, all related to this new particular niche. These were things I wrote while bored as a researcher for when I had my own department to run. I found the drive and opened it up, and to my great surprise and joy, I had written everything I would need years ago. It is all still totally relevant.
Oh,
Not only this, but all my references are intact. All I need to do is reformat everything to fit their technical style. Thank you, past me, for seemingly writing all of this stuff in vain 8 years ago. Now it's paid off. And this person also has natal Mars in Capricorn, which I feel is very relevant to what is being discussed here.
Wow.
Oh my God. That is phenomenal. It's like you anticipated and precognized the future need, did the work in advance, prepped your future self for its elevation to a new role. I mean, that's just really cool.
Yeah.
That's a memorable, there's a lot of memorable grab stories of the past couple of years. That is a very good one.
Yeah, and that's like a sweet Mars retrograde story.
Yeah, that's a good one.
We gotta have a little bit on both sides, even if they're overwhelmingly vulnerable.
Oh, yeah. I thought that it was really interesting that, okay, so I'm going to keep this anonymous as possible, but someone I know through well, I'll give an example. It would be someone like the person who cuts your hair. It's not someone you know, but it's someone you visit for a service, right? Well, this is someone in my life like that I've looked at their chart for fun before, like really casually, and I've never said much about. And I noticed that they were going to have the Mars retrograde going over a very sensitive point in Cancer while pregnant. And I was like, ooh, like I was worried. I didn't say a word, right? Because it's not my business, and who knows? It could mean a million things.
Yes.
So, I mean, you just don't know. And so I was like, okay, well, I found out that this person prematurely went into labor. So they had, what do they call it? Preemie? Yeah. Is that what it's called? The preemie?
Preemie.
Yeah. So premature, that's what it means. Okay. Sorry. I was like, what does it mean? Yeah. So premature. So, and then it was in the NICU. I think that's what they call it.
Yeah.
For like a while. And I believe they're just now going home, but everything's okay.
Oh, that's great.
But I was like, yeah. So it was very instructive because it was my worst fear that you should lose the pregnancy, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there was something that was a little bit difficult, like very unexpected, but it ended up being okay. And that's why you just have to be careful of assuming the worst with anything in astrology, because you just don't know. You really don't. And some stories end up, I don't know, like I have no doubt that this is the kind of person for whom this experience was probably a heart opening and very deepening experience, you know?
Yeah.
It's like Dave Chappelle said, I heard him say this one time. I don't remember where I heard him say this, but he said, you know, it's not that having kids is not that there's more love in my life. It's that there's more capacity to love in my life. And I just think that when I've seen over the years that when women go through something really difficult during pregnancy or delivery or something like that, there's a trauma that might have to be healed, but there's also often a deepening of the experience of mothering itself that blooms out of the experiences, or the capacity to mother grows when you go through hard stuff. And that's kind of I'm using that as a metaphor for what we've all been going through with Mars and Cancer, regardless if you literally have kids or not. There's some deepening capacity to love or nurture ourselves or something like that seems to be growing in all of this.
Yeah, and you're talking about the very delicate balance, like a lot of astrologers have to hold, which is that there can be such a thing as an event that is subjectively unpleasant or that we would wish not to have. But most of the time when I speak with clients about events like that and friends and in my own life, I'm so defensive about it. If you ask me if I would change it, it's like, no, that was the experience I lived. I'm not saying I would change it. Maybe I wouldn't choose it in the future going forward, but that's my life and that's the experience I had. And there's a real defensiveness about that too.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Very well said. So on that note, because we do have Mars in Cancer turning direct this month and a lot of other interesting things happening, this will be sort of the month in which we conclude the retrograde portion of Mars's show. So but we'll get there. Let's start at the beginning of the month. This opening part of February, we have called Benefic Beginnings. And I'm going to put it up on the screen here so that we can take a look at it. Starting on February 1st with a very, very lovely Venus-Neptune conjunction.
At the degree of Venus's exaltation even.
Ooh, that's right. Good point. I didn't even think of that. That's a great point. Yeah, and the North Node is there as well. It has North Node, if you use the mean node system of measurement, which is what I personally use, has just entered the sign of Pisces, coming out of Aries. So our eclipses are starting to change, and we have this meeting of Venus and Neptune on Venus's exaltation degree with the North Node. Okay, I don't have my exaltation degrees memorized.
27.
Okay,
for Venus and Pisces.
So it's a degree off, but close enough. Okay.
I think the actual conjunction does happen at 27, but
you're right. Yeah, because it's I'm over the minutes.
And that's fine.
Now we're just splitting.
Whitney, why don't you kick this off? This has Whitney written all over it.
Well, I mean, I know that it's Adam's favorite transit, but I am happy to lead us in because, boy, Venus, Neptune, the North Node all together. This is just a transit of good vibes. Like nothing that I can see bad about this, but there's maybe a little quality of rose-colored glasses that we have here, and maybe I've got those on already. But I must say as well that this is also my Venus return and my nodal return. So I'm also hoping for like just real extra goodness, right? Maximize the romance, maximize the good vibes. I think this is a great way to start the month, hence Benefic Beginnings.
Yeah. I did it. Everyone will have seen in yesterday's talk, because we have Thursday, Friday for monthly overview and horoscopes for February. I actually gave this a little bit of attention since it's a transit coming over the weekend in yesterday's video. And one of the things that I said about this is it's always my favorite date night. I either consciously or sometimes unconsciously have had the best date nights. And often you'll plan a date night. It's like Venus Neptune. Let's go do something fun, or let's go like going to see a movie, going out to dinner. It's not going to be like a normal movie that you see when Venus is conjoined Neptune. It's always something like really otherworldly you end up watching. I think there was a Venus. Oh, I can't
like
remember.
The Shape of Water. Remember that movie?
Yes,
that is so
yeah,
Venus
exactly.
Neptune.
It is Venus Neptune. I saw The Way of Water, the Avatar, the second one, where it was all about water. Yeah, and it was really fun and super watery. And I was like, gosh, this is Venus. And I'm almost positive it was a Venus Neptune aspect on that one too. But I just feel like these are the Venus Neptune contacts when Venus is exalted in Pisces have this kind of imaginative, romantic, they amplify those themes of romance and imagination. And you can just get swept up in it, but it's quick enough where, you know, you don't usually get lost. Now, I would say if you have Neptune transiting your natal Venus in your birth chart, that's a different story because it's gonna last like a year and a half. There's a pretty good chance you're gonna get swept up in something that you're gonna come out of a fog, right? But this one's so quick because of it being a mundane transit that I feel like it's hard to really lose yourself. And it's especially with Venus being so well dignified, it tends to come through in very creative, romantic, sensual, imaginative ways. I mean, one thing I would warn everybody of, the rose-colored glasses thing, is like, you know, I would steer clear of getting intensely intoxicated during this transit, because then you have an opportunity to take something way further than it should go, or you won't see things as clearly. But I think that if you're practicing moderation, it's really hard to get completely swept off into illusion. With a transit that moves this quickly, that at the very least, the illusion will have been like a day or two, you know?
Well, and that's a good point, because with the North Node here, and that conjunction actually happens, I think, exactly the next day. But I mean, again, splitting hairs, like, it's a good reminder to stay grounded, because I think with the North Node there may be this excess of longing, or what are we dreaming for, right? And so, yeah, maybe there is with Neptune there the chance to get a little bit swept away. But you know what the ancient astrologers say, good with a good one. And so I'm just going with that.
Right. North Node is good with a good one, bad with a bad one. That means it just tends to amplify or augment whatever it touches. Like it's a bit like Jupiter in that sense, where Jupiter can inflate and make something excessive in sometimes problematic ways. But yeah, this one to me, if you think of Rahu as well in Indian astrology, the idea with Rahu is that there will be unfulfilled desires that Rahu sort of presses the button of. And with Venus, Neptune, and the North Node together, these are maybe some pretty intense emotional fantasies that are also representative of dreams, desires, wishes, hopes, aspirations. And that could flood through and remain a very compelling force for a while, because Venus is going to retrograde back into this position. And there may be introduced something right now that becomes really significant in the next couple of months, actually. So maybe I take back just a little bit of the idea that there's no like long lasting effect here because of that. But what I mean is that I think it would be really unlikely that you would wake up married to someone in Vegas.
Yeah.
I just like that level of people getting freaked out by you just getting totally swept away. Like I wouldn't worry about it on that level.
I think your point about movies is so spot on. Some of what I've really been thinking about for Neptune Saturn is like how stories and images in the broader sense and archetypes can be used to create feeling in your own body. And so watching those aspirational, longing, yearning type films, or reading those kinds of stories to help yourself let your heart surge a little bit here, I can think of worse ways to find a highlight in a Mars retrograde. And to your point, Adam, there is something very interesting happening with some of the faster moving planets this year. For Venus, the story is one of hand-holding across the threshold into Aries for both Saturn and Neptune, because she brings Neptune in and then she retrogrades back to sort of like tease Saturn in. And even when the conjunction happens actually in February of next year, she'll be in late Pisces about to head over to meet that conjunction as well. So Venus and Saturn and Neptune are sort of all telling the same story, especially with her retrograde happening there in Aries.
Let me show people what that looks like, because that was really nicely put. And I want to highlight this. So if we take this through, and I think, you know what, watch this here. So I'm going to go, if we look at, this is early March, you're going to see that Venus stations right here and is turning retrograde by March 3rd. So it's just a couple of days, and let me adjust this slightly. And then Venus retrogrades. Mercury catches up to Venus, crosses Venus, stations, and retrogrades. So then you get the two planets retrograding together. The sun then enters Aries. Venus then retrogrades into Pisces. Mercury then retrogrades into Pisces. They're all hanging out. They all cross right over the face of Neptune. This is what Alexandra was just explaining. And then Neptune crosses into Aries. What's interesting about that is the day before Neptune crosses into Aries on March 29th, we also have a solar eclipse in Aries.
At 8 Aries.
And then Neptune, it's like there's this major ritual happening in the temple of Aries. And the next day, house guest Neptune arrives. It's like, wow, that's a really striking chain of events. Venus retrograde, Mercury retrograde, a solar eclipse, and then Neptune enters. And then if you take this forward a little bit further, I mean, this is something else. Eventually, Mercury will re-enter. Of course, they both kind of cross back into Saturn's territory as well. Then Venus kind of crosses over Saturn by the end of April. And then by the end of May, Saturn's in Aries as well. So
right.
And that's fascinating, because if you take this forward just a little bit, by the time that Saturn enters Aries, right, Venus is still there. So Venus is really, you're right. That's a really brilliant way of putting it, that Venus is sort of hand holding both of those planets across the threshold through its retrograde. That is why next month, when we do our breakdown for horoscopes and month ahead, March is like
huge month.
No
hard outs on March.
Yeah, we're going to need to book 2 hours.
Yeah, no, and every single person's whole sign house of Aries in your birth chart is having like a major trance dance party for the month of March. It is a whole thing happening in March with Aries, that whole sign house of Aries. So anyway, okay, I digress here, but that was good to show. I wanted to show everyone what Alexandra was just talking about, because that was such a nice summary, but then it helps, I think, to see it.
Definitely does.
Let's go back to the beginning of February. Whoops, I went into January.
I think we're at February 3rd, where we have, Venus conjoining the North Node. Venus, then she pushes off into Aries, and Mercury is trining Jupiter.
Yes. So what do you guys think? This is nice, because the next thing that's happening, I'm just going to include this here, and we're going to talk about both of them. The next day, Jupiter turns direct. This is, of course, happening right after the sun has just trined Jupiter, which is the signal we know in the synodic cycle that means that Jupiter's changing directions. So that trine from the sun, and then the subsequent trine from Mercury to Jupiter as it's changing directions, signals something important is happening with that trine that's more than just a usual trine because of Jupiter's shift. Would you guys agree with that?
Absolutely, 100%. And I mean, ever the student, right? One of the things when I was prepping this, I was like, what is their significance behind the station, and how does the station affect Jupiter in this scenario? Because yes, of course, let's delineate Mercury in Aquarius trine Jupiter in Gemini, and there's lots of information, or maybe too much information, maybe a little bit arrogant, right? But I'm interested that the timing of this is really happening during the station, and I'm wondering if there's another layer to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it ties back into the fact that Jupiter has been building this momentum in Gemini, and it stationed retrograde around 21 Gemini. And then we had that full moon in December at 23, which was just outside the bounds of where Jupiter had achieved. And so I do think there is kind of something significant happening here with Jupiter building momentum, moving into the last and next phase of the Jupiter-Saturn square across the cardinal signs. Like, it really feels like Jupiter is going to be building momentum again.
That's a nice way of putting it. one of the things that I notice here is if you go back to, what was it? It was about October 10th, October 9th, that Jupiter turned retrograde. It was right around there. That if you look at the development taking place in the whole sign house of Gemini in your chart from October to right now, you may notice that a period of delays or setbacks or reversals, revisions, a process of refinement is completing. And when it completes itself, it's almost like, okay, and now we move forward into some new territory again. Although many people will talk about Jupiter in direct motion going back over the degrees that it went through in its retrograde, I don't think that means that there won't be completely new material coming in from Jupiter's forward movement. Sometimes people think, oh, nothing truly new happens until it gets past the degree it's stationed retrograde at. I've never seen that as a thing. It's as though when Jupiter turns direct, whatever it went back through, now it's ready for something new, or any planet turning direct, in other words.
But Jupiter especially.
yeah, exactly. This is so expansive, and Jupiter is so life-bringing. I mean, it was the traditional planet associated with sperm, and with it was the exalted in the sign of Cancer, the gateway of mankind. It was a traditional planet of fertility. And I think that the retrogradation is almost like a period of things being it's not usual for Jupiter to be signifying things that are falling apart, right? Or for things to be delayed. Jupiter's like sunshine and rain in the spring. It's very life-giving and abundant. And I feel like Jupiter direct, we really do feel the momentum starting to come back in an area of your life.
Yeah, I like that. That makes perfect sense. And Mercury kind of hitting that makes us feel like that's part of the catalyst for moving forward, right? Like, what are the lessons that we have learned about, Adam, you said expansiveness or taking up space, right, in Gemini? Or what are we ready to make bigger or announce in our lives? That's okay, great. I love it.
I like that Mercury is Jupiter's host as well. So it's as though Jupiter is being resourced with something that can now flip the script. And like Jupiter in Gemini now has some vital information, constructive, useful technology, some data points or some ideas or some understanding that Jupiter goes, oh, okay, great. I've been thinking about that. I've been working on that, or I've been waiting for that. And now there's a clear path forward. And so I could even see it as just constructive agreements being made in business relationships, or a period of, I talked about this, just made the YouTube video this morning for this one next week when I'm talking about this in next Monday's video. And I was like, there's a point when you're putting a puzzle together where all of the pieces that seem individual are really hard to find and fit together. We do this with our kids. And once you get enough pieces, then all of a sudden the last 40 pieces are super easy to find and put together, right? So I talked about that as this point in putting a puzzle together where enough is there that you start feeling like the whole thing starts emerging really rapidly.
Yes.
And I feel like that's kind of an image that works for this trine.
Beautiful.
We're picking up steam.
Yeah. Well, let's go into our next section of the month, which we have called Flashes Forward. This is going to be something that we see as a period a little bit more like around the middle of the month, or the early third of the month, starting on the 9th with Mercury's Cazimi. I'm going to let Alexandra tell us about this subcategory, Flashes for. Why have we titled this Flashes Forward?
Yeah. So on the 9th, we have Mars trining Saturn, and we have a Mercury Cazimi. Now, I think this is pretty interesting, and I feel like your audience, you will appreciate the journal fodder, if nothing else. But we have this Sun conjunct Mercury at 20 degrees Aquarius on February 9th. The new moon on January 29th, 2025, is at 9 degrees Aquarius. In the coming years, we will have only 2 eclipses in Leo. There are 2 total solar eclipses. They happen at 9 and 20 degrees Leo. So there's just something kind of curious here. And the effect, I think, is going to be deeply subtle and easily missed, of course. But it's almost like pulling back and reading a newspaper from the end of your arm because you don't want to put on your reader glasses. There are really things that we can learn through the lens of the opposition. So I think this is kind of interesting because it's touching this degree of the Aquarius Leo axis that's going to be lit up in the next 2 years by these total solar eclipses in the sun's domicile of Leo. I think this is kind of like a cool cosmic opportunity to create like some kind of journal entry or some kind of, I was imagining like a collage of headlines about your life, something Aquarian that you can read back or look back at in the next couple of years. But whatever it is, whatever is feeling kind of authentic to you, some things to think about, across that Leo Aquarius axis are like your unique gifts, your solar expression, your relationship to solar expression, which is like individuality and leadership, or places that you shine and places that you are generous. And the Aquarius part of this, which is going to be lit up by, Pluto for the next 20 years. Can you think about your role in the collective and how you share those gifts that you have? What are ways that you are kind of punished for being different, or ways that you mold in to fit with others? Are there places where you feel like an outsider versus where you simply feel eccentric, or where you kind of have this more permissible sense of other? So for me, this is kind of like the flashing forward there, and it's complemented by this Mars trining Saturn that is flashing us forward to September of this year, where we're going to have, it's like actually technically in October to November, we have a grand water trine as planets come through Scorpio. So there's both these like little touches of whatever's going on in this mid-month part that I think kind of connect in specific ways to what's coming.
Yeah.
So interesting. I love how you really wove that together, Alexandra. And, the Mercury, Cazimi, Mars trine Saturn on the same day are all kind of leading up to the full moon moment. You illustrated that so beautifully. The only other thing I really want to touch on is that really this Mars Saturn trine, we're going to be feeling it in some way basically all month because of how slowly these planets are moving. And so and remember, these are our malefics, right? But they are in a helpful aspect. So there's some part about February that feels a little bit hard, not as hard as January. I think we're a little bit better than January, but we're learning a lesson here that feels a little bit uncomfortable, but that is really ultimately helpful. And I couldn't help but think about my own experiences with Mars retrograding in Cancer right now, and then pulling in Saturn and the concept of Chronos, right? And time. And I wonder if there's something here about the fear of losing time as we move forward with goals that we're looking toward. And you can tie that into the Leo full moon as well, but we're not quite there yet. So that's, I'm really interested in this Mars trine Saturn that we'll be feeling throughout the month.
I think the most constructive thing I can say about Mars and Saturn when they get together and do something positive together, right? Because there's lots of ways you can think about Mars Saturn coming together, and it's sort of like a pressure cooker, or some difficulties you can imagine with these two planets. But the thing that they do together well is they bring maturity and action together, so that you have this kind of wisdom and a maturity, a discipline and a focus, and that can concentrate and direct the will and our actions in very effective, very thoughtful ways. So when I think about these two planets coming together to solve a problem, I like it because there's a certain amount of restraint that Saturn brings to Mars, and there's a certain amount of action that Mars may bring to the recalcitrance of Saturn. And so there's like the two, especially in a trine, can really reflect some kind of mature effort or a mature use of action and willpower. I like their ability to work under pressure together always. Like Mars Saturn is, I heard Jen Zart one time say that Mars Saturn is like a pressure cooker, that you have a deadline and Mars Saturn comes up and you're just working within constraints and working under the pressure of necessity, Saturn, but effectively and with a little bit of speed and urgency. Some people who I've noticed, people who have Mars Saturn often thrive in any combination in their chart, like hard aspects or a trine or something close, that they'll thrive under pressure. They'll be the ER nurse, or they'll be the surgeon, performing emergency surgeries, or they'll have some ability to do well in intense confined spaces. So I like this combination in a trine to be able to effectively address something that's a little intense, but to have the wherewithal to do it. The other thing that comes to my mind is with Mars retrograde, it's sometimes uncomfortable to feel like, oh, I've graduated from this or that problem in my life, only to realize that you haven't. And this could be something where we feel limited by the same old, and it's really frustrating. And yet the trine suggests to me that there's a reason that we're being brought back into something that we might feel limited by. There's an insight. It's going to be different this time. There's going to be a different outcome, even though the problem might seem like the same problem, or the conundrum or pressure or circumstances of stress may look or feel the same coming back through a retrograde, but there's a different, more mature way of handling things this time. And I like the Mercury Cazimi at the heart of the sun as perhaps providing a spark of insight. Mercury Cazimis they often represent super inventive moments where problem solving or insights or epiphanies are pronounced. And so I like this as a potential moment to have insight into something difficult and to know what to do.
Adam, you are reading personally for Patrick Mahomes on Super Bowl Sunday right now. He has his Saturn in Pisces and he has a Cancer moon, most likely. And Jalen Hurts actually has Mars in Cancer and Jupiter in Pisces and an early Aquarius moon. So this is quite ambiguous for those two right here.
Yeah, that's I didn't know that. That's really fascinating. I personally am such a lover of novelty. I cannot stand that I am being forced to watch the same Super Bowl again.
Well, it's exactly what you just described, like verbatim. Go back and watch this because you were like, it's the same problem. We thought we graduated from this. We have to come back to it. It's different now. There may be a different outcome now. Like you just verbatim read the Super Bowl.
Exactly. That is so funny. I wasn't even thinking about that. But yeah, but isn't it interesting that this would be, if the Eagles managed to win and it wasn't the same old outcome, that would be something. However, the three-peat and making NFL history is an interesting way of looking at it too. So yeah, I don't know. That's fascinating. I'm glad you brought that up.
We'll dig into that offline.
Hey now, the Cazimi and the full moon are square Uranus as well. So anything could happen here.
Ooh, look at that. Yeah, we have, let me back this up so we can take a look at that full moon. This is a full moon in Leo. And the full moon in Leo, let me get it back to 24 degrees here. Full moon in Leo will be taking place early in the morning on Wednesday, February 12th. This is what Alexandra was alluding to when she talked about eventual eclipses. These are a ways off. And in case people got a little confused.
26, 27.
You see, these are just entering Virgo and Pisces. So it's not going to be until 2026 into 7, as Alexandra just said, that we see the nodes in Leo and Aquarius. But the point is really solid, which is that some of these full moons, you said the point you made was
even
that
this full moon is also happening at 24 Leo, and there's a lunar eclipse at 24 Aquarius. So there's stuff hanging off the degrees of this Aquarius Leo axis that is like that subtle foreshadowing. And I feel like most people, it's just life that flies by. But I feel like your audience keeps journals in a way that they might just put a little note in there and come back to it.
Yes, put a little note as to what's happening around this full moon, because there may be some connective tissue with those eclipses.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. The full moon in Leo to me is a nice, it's a nice kind of, it's a moment, especially because the ruler is the sun in Aquarius, where there's tensions. The easiest tensions I would watch for, or the things that I think will be most obvious, I should say, are going to be the personal versus collective tensions. The Leonic part of us we might think of as the part that is special and unique as a snowflake. I think of the Aquarius part as our recognition that we're the snowflake that's part of a snowfall, that we have a collective identity and role and sphere of life, in addition to the fulfillment and development of an interpersonal heart space or something like that. So those tensions could be more pronounced in terms of where you feel you need to place attention personally and what kinds of tensions or involvements or commitments you have collectively. What do you guys think?
Well said, Adam. A full moon in Leo is going to bring up themes, leonine themes, bravery, courage, strength, and maybe some brand new ideals too. I think we've talked about the Leo Aquarius axis, and the moon is reflecting back the light of the sun, right? It's reflecting back experiences and insights of the sun and the Mercury cazimi that we just went through. And so I could definitely see some of those like very lofty Aquarian visions sort of driving this bravery and courageousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this kicks up some of the themes from the sort of the transits that happen after the next couple days. But essentially, we have a little bit of parallel storylines happening across the water signs versus, this Aquarian stuff. And now with the moon in Leo, I think you said the word snowflake, and I was like, oh, that's so interesting when you think about the way that an Aquarius hive mind treats an individual. It's like a snowflake, and there's something negative about that, or like we're challenging about that. I do find that like all of the stuff going on through Aquarius right now is just interesting things that I'm kind of keeping track of and paying attention to in terms of how Pluto, will evolve across Aquarius, and this moon will give us some important clues too.
Yeah. Just because we have a hard stop today, I'm going to keep us rolling along here after looking at that full moon in Leo. We're going into the last part of the month, which we have called lunar links. And Alexandra, why don't you explain to us this very creative title? But it is super interesting to see what's happening here in these last days of the month.
Yes, I can do it. So essentially we have, starting with around the 20th, we have Mercury squaring Jupiter and a couple other things unfold. We have Mars stationing direct on the 23rd. Mercury is trining Mars. And so basically there's also a Mercury-Saturn conjunction, and I'm just kind of running through these transits, then I'll kind of contextualize them. So we have Mercury-Saturn in Pisces trining Mars in Cancer. And then separately, we have a moon-Pluto conjunction that comes as the moon comes into Aquarius that is sextiling and trining the benefics.
Okay, let's go back through this one at a time because I just got lost. So probably a lot of other people may have had. So let's go slowly. Starting on the 20th, Mercury squares Jupiter.
Yep.
And let me just draw this out. We'll just go through it super slow. So Mercury here on, I need to go back a few days here. Let's go back to the 20th. So on the 20th, Mercury will square Jupiter.
Yeah.
This is the first transit of this part of the month that we're looking at. And then after this, Mercury will trine Mars. Now, that trine will take place on the 23rd. That trine connects Mercury to Mars, who is stationing at this time to turn direct on the same day.
Yes.
And now, one of the things the reason we're calling this lunar links is because the moon, as the ruler of Mars, who is turning retrograde, is involved with a whole bunch of aspects and a change of direction. So there's a lot that the moon actually does during this period. A lot of what the moon is doing is going to be really important because of the importance of Mars turning direct in the moon sign. Then we see Mercury conjunct Saturn, and that takes place on the 25th. Whoops, go back. Here's the 25th. And this day, Alexandra was saying moon conjoins Pluto. Yeah. And granted, now Mars is barely just moving direct. So this is really still in the process of Mars turning direct in the moon sign. So what Alexandra wants everybody to pay attention to, just a simple summary, is from February 20th through the end of the month, as Mars is turning direct, there's a bunch of aspects to Mars, and the moon ruling that Mars turning direct is going through quite a few things herself. Is that a good summary?
Beautiful. Thank you, Adam, for making sense of my mush.
No, you're genius. That I just need to make sure that it took me a second to be like, wait, okay, yes.
No, that's exactly right. And the moon Pluto stuff, it's sextiling Venus and trining Jupiter. So the reason, yes, of lunar links is like we've got the moon and the benefics doing something over here. And then over here, we have Mercury, Saturn, and Mars doing their own other thing. And they are linked and connected by the moon.
There we go. Yeah, that is really fascinating. These little patterns become so important. So just reiterating that, these two planets here are trining Mars, who's turning direct, and they are linked up through the fact that we have the moon. They're trining Mars in the moon sign while the moon is hitting all of these major aspects in one day. Conjunction to Pluto, sextile to Venus, trine to Jupiter. That's quite a day. It really is quite a period of time called lunar links.
Yeah, exactly. No, it seems so crazy and chaotic, but it really, like, it was reminding me of such a archetypal story that we can see in so many different pieces of media. Like, it was reminding me of, there's that book, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. But the one that was like really loud for me was the movie Interstellar, where the main character Cooper, played by Matthew McConaughey, is on this like deeply intellectual journey in this other planet. And 23 years goes by and he sits back down in that chair and he watches all of these emotional messages from his family that's like so far away. He's doing this aloof mission that's changing the circumstances, and he's playing with fortune and the rules of time. But it's really actually setting up this distance and this forced removal from his relationship with his children. And he watches them over the course of 23 years of video messages, like get married, have children, pass away. And so it feels like there's this disparity between the aloof air sign stuff that's happening with the benefics and the moon Pluto versus this watery Mars, Saturn, Mercury thing that's being told too.
That is a really interesting. I love the way you put that. That yeah, the wateriness is around this period of time is really pronounced. You have Mercury in Pisces, just by the way, moving into evening star position, so becoming visible, making a phasal appearance in water, connecting with a trine to Mars retrograde in Cancer that's changing directions. And then Mercury conjoins Saturn. And then we get a new moon in Pisces on the 27th as well. So it really is this super watery period. But then at the same time, Jupiter's turning direct, and you do have this little interlude that's super, super airy, especially when the moon is in Aquarius during those days, which would be, just to speed this up again, this is February 25th and 26th in particular, maybe even into early morning, the 27th. And then our new moon is in Pisces on the 27th, ruled by Jupiter in an air sign. So yeah, that contrast between air and water, that's really a nice thing to think about for this last part of the month.
I think it's also really fascinating that, well, we spoke about the Mercury Jupiter trine earlier in the month, but how that Mercury at that point kind of gave Jupiter a little bit of gas to get going on its mission forward, right? And we're kind of seeing a similar thing happen here with Mercury trining Mars as Mars moves direct. And so I think there's just something really positive here about how we move forward with our lessons. You know, it's like,
yeah,
we're giving it gas, guys. Let's go. Pile up in Pisces.
Something that just occurred to me, Whitney, while you were talking, is that one of the designations that were given to planets in water signs, they were said to be mute in ancient astrology. And that word, actually, the translation of it, English convention, the word mute, but the Greek, from what I've understood, meant something like quiet, shy, secretive, hidden, somewhat mysterious. So water signs had this classification. What I find really interesting is Mercury, when it makes that trine to Jupiter turning direct as its host, is invisible. And it's going through the Cazimi, it's going through rebirth, and now it's appearing in contact with that Jupiter as it is contacting that Jupiter, I should say, as it appears, coming into the evening star position. I wonder if there isn't something signified earlier in the month when Jupiter goes direct and Mercury trines Jupiter, that would be February 3rd or 4th, that then reveals itself around this time. That there's, that you start seeing, it's almost as though we have the information and now whatever we've done with that will be made known. And I wonder if it will be difficult to speak that truth because
that's like so interesting, because when I was like thinking about this, I was thinking about the Joni Mitchell album Blue, and how Bob Dylan was obsessed with that album and then wrote the song Tangled Up in Blue. And so it kind of was a response, but not a response. And it has that like Jupiter Mercury mutual reception of like, it's incoherent, but it's productive incoherence. And it's this illusion. It's totally what you were describing. That's really interesting.
Oh, I love that. There's a bunch of examples of that in music. Like I think of Joni Mitchell's response to Neil Young. I think he wrote the song Sugar Mountain, and then she wrote the Circle Game in response, or maybe it was the other way around. But anyway, that kind of call and response thing, that's really fascinating given the mutual reception. I hadn't thought about it that way. That's a really good idea. The other thing that comes to my mind is like when Mercury appears as the evening star, Mercury will be moving right into the conjunction with Saturn. Right. Mercury's in its fall, but has the mutual reception with Jupiter. Their last contact was this trine and then the Cazimi. It just makes me feel like something is going to come forth that may not be easy to say or announce or speak, or it's like the messenger is appearing with something that it might be sort of like when you have to let someone down, but you're really excited about where you're going, like, yeah. I don't know how that makes sense or not. Sometimes you have plans in life and you realize like, I'm really excited about this, but I know someone's going to be disappointed because I'm not going to be able to do this thing with them anymore, or something like that.
It makes absolute sense. That's what I'm thinking about with Mercury conjoining Saturn as well. It's like, are there endings here that lead to our beginnings, to our new moon moment that's coming up here in a second, right?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Mercury's trining Mars as Mars is changing directions. Mercury also hit Jupiter as Jupiter was changing directions. That's an interesting correlation. And then Mercury conjoins Saturn on the 25th. And then almost, instantly after that, 2 days later, we have the new moon in Pisces. So yeah, whatever's coming forth there is really fascinating, because it's also happening around the culmination of Neptune, the North Node with Neptune. Yeah. It's like real dreamy, watery stuff happening. Mars turning direct in a water sign too. Fascinating.
It's like we've come full circle back to our watery, dreamy, watery nature that we began with.
Right. And like some of the things that I could see coming out of so much water in the change of Mars would be things that are emotionally resolving themselves somehow. Things that aren't easy to deal with emotionally, but it's like there's a good, right, mature way to do something, and you have to get honest, or you have to get real, or you have to let something go, or something like that.
You know, my friend, a very talented astrologer, Sarah Posh, we were thinking together about what's going on for Pisces slice of life. And she was like, you know, when you finish a level of a video game, you move on to a harder level, and you've succeeded and you've won, and it doesn't get easier for it, and you're happy for it. And I think there's a little bit of that quality to what's going on in Pisces.
That's really interesting. I love, there's a type of video game that I got into during the pandemic. It was like, I was, you know, obviously all of us were kind of cooped up. So I was like, I'd gone back to playing some video games for the first time in many, many years. And I started playing these games called Souls, like Dark Souls. I don't know if you've ever heard of them before.
That is so brutal. Just why?
They are ridiculously hard. Like, first of all, they're very, very hard. And I am not someone who does well like failing at video games. Like I will just keep playing until I get good enough to overcome the difficulty. These really pushed my sanity limits in terms of how difficult they were. But then what was funny was that you get done with a game and it's like, oh yeah, now you enter New Game Plus, where you play the exact same game, but all of the enemies get even more difficult. And all of a sudden I realized there are people who do this through 6-7 levels of progressively playing the same game harder and harder. And I just about lost my mind playing the first level of the entire game, you know? So anyway, that's really funny because I feel like it's a really, really good analogy that when you finish a video game, the next level gets harder, and somehow you feel like you're excited because you've earned that next level of difficulty. That's what got me through those Souls games.
Right. And this is our like new initiation, but it's Pisces. So it comes with a dose of optimism. And you know, I'm here for that.
Yeah.
I like this one too. I think this one could be very powerful in ritual too, because it is so much about feeling into our big dreams and visions for the future. And I don't want to sleep on the fact that Mercury is also exactly sextiling Uranus at this moment too. So there could be a level of spontaneity here, or at least just sort of like excitement that brings us forward.
I like to think about Pisces as a sign that is wrestling the light from the darkness, because it's a transitional sign that's moving us into Aries, where the light is now more than the dark on the light half of the solar year. It's like this kind of redemptive wrestling of light from darkness feels especially poignant as two heavy planets are getting ready to leave Pisces and enter Aries. Well, this conflagration of water, it feels like a transitional space. The end of the month, it's not we've had lots of pileups in Pisces since Neptune's been and Saturn's been, and this is a little different because they're both going to enter Aries shortly. March is like a very intense explosion of that initiatory energy of Aries, and the transitional space that Pisces brings us through is therefore, I think, probably going to be a little bit more potent at the end of this month.
Yeah, whatever your business is with Saturn and Neptune and Pisces, this is the time to be thinking about how to wrap that up.
Yeah. It will go out with some feelings of things that still have to be dealt with the North Node going over it, though. There'll be a feeling of like some kind of push that comes through really strong. It's interesting. Anyway, we are at our hard stopping point, so I want to make sure that I tell you how you can get in touch with these wonderful astrologers. So Alexandra, you can find at 9livesastrology.com, where you can book a reading with her and check out everything that she is up to, which I highly recommend doing, especially if you want to get a good read on the Venus retrograde, all these movements into Aries, the eclipse is coming up. Book a reading with Alexandra. You won't regret it. Instagram, 9livesastrology, if you want to follow. She does some live streams with other astrologers and all sorts of good stuff that you can follow on Instagram. And then for Whitney, it is astroarcana.com. You can book a reading with Whitney and check out what's happening for you this spring and summer. And she will be more than ready to dive in with you, looking at all these big transits that we have coming up. So check that out. Both wonderful options for readings. And then Instagram for Whitney is astro.arcana.astrology. So you can follow her there. And she has been making wonderful content on the regular. And I've really been enjoying what you've been doing on Instagram lately, Whitney. So good on you.
Thank you. I promise to share lots of stories around this astrology, mine and yours. I mean, not yours, like the audience.
Yes, totally. Well, and by the way, this coming month, if you've got stories to share, we'd love to feature some of them on these episodes. So use the hashtag grab, tell us the transit, tell us your story, be concise, or email us the story if you prefer, grab@nightlightastrology.com. Just don't share anything you don't mind us reading out loud on our video here. So, all right, that is it for this month. You all have an absolutely fantastic month of February. We will be breaking down transits day by day, week by week as the month goes on, and we'll be back in March to tell you all about the good things coming then. Take it easy, everybody.
Cheers.
Happy February.